There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
And so Matthew, as Levi the tax gatherer, he would have had the whole authority of Rome behind him. And so there would actually be a literal Roman guard that would literally be standing behind him with a spear in his hand behind Matthew's little tax booth. And that's to enforce the payment of taxes to Rome. And those who would be taxed would be anybody that would be traveling through his area. And he would even be enforcing it not only from the travelers, but he would be enforcing it from his own people, the Jews. And so all Jews hated tax collectors. And so that means that all of Matthew's friends, well, they wouldn't have been Jews. They would have all been mostly Gentile Romans. They're probably other tax gatherers and Roman soldiers and other morally corrupted people. And Matthew's tax booth, it was located in Capernaum, which is the same city that Jesus had chosen for himself to be the center of his ministry. In Capernaum, it was the largest fishing village that was on the Sea of Galilee. But Capernaum was also the place where the Via Maris ran through, which is also called the Silk Highway, which was the international trade route that led all the way down to Egypt. And this highway wasn't even very far from the King's Highway, which led to Mesopotamia. So this major crossroad is the main trade route for the whole known world. So one could travel all the way from Africa to Europe or from Asia to Africa. And so everyone who traveled through his area, Matthew would be able to get his little piece for Rome, and he would be able to get his little piece for himself. And this kind of makes you wonder, how many times did Jesus actually travel past Matthew's booth and pay Matthew taxes? Because that's where Jesus was walking back and forth with all his disciples. And you wonder, how well did Matthew get to know Jesus before Jesus asked him to follow him? So Matthew collecting taxes for Rome, it would have gone something like this. It'd be like, well, good morning, Mrs. Brown. I see you're using a 4-wheel cart today. Well, that'll cost you 2 mina. 4 wheels, 2 mina. Wow, Mr. Green, did you have a good year this year? I've never seen such beautiful pomegranates and so many. What are pomegranates going for these days? I think you owe Rome about 10 shekels. And so Matthew, he would have been able to charge for carts. He would have been able to charge for animals, for produce. He would even be able to charge for how many people you had in your party traveling through his area. And then he would have to pay Rome a certain amount to be able to operate his tax business, but then he'd be able to keep the rest. But after Jesus called Levi to follow him, Matthew, he left that all behind to become a disciple. Because Matthew, he saw something different about Jesus, that in Jesus there was no hypocrisy. Jesus was pure. He spoke words of truth, and he had a different kind of riches, and he had a different kind of power, and it was nothing like Rome's, and it was nothing like the Pharisees or the Sadducees. And if you notice, Jesus, he never called religious people. He just called regular people. And the people that he called, they weren't even very good people. They were just people like us. Because the fact is that Matthew was anything but good or religious. In fact, he was anti-religious. But after Matthew left his business of tax collecting, there was no way that he would ever be able to return to it. and he couldn't take that business with him to follow Jesus. By following Jesus, it cost Matthew everything he had. It cost him all his money and all his potential income. It cost him everything. For Simon Peter and for James and John, they would always be able to go back to fishing if they wanted to. But for Matthew, there was nothing to go back to. He was done. Now, this is the same for us. When Jesus reveals himself to us and he calls us to himself, it's not religious, it's just actually real. And when we find out who he is and that he is who he says he is, it costs us to follow him the same. It costs us everything. Our salvation is always free. Jesus paid for that. He paid the whole price, and he was the only one who could. But to be his disciple, to be Jesus' disciple, it will cost you everything. You can't take your old life with you and follow Christ. You just can't live out your old life and just add a little Jesus to it. You can't bring along the drugs or the booze or all the women or all the men. You can't fit your old life into following Jesus because it'll never work. But for your salvation, it costs Jesus his life. And for you to become a disciple, it will cost you your life. And that's exactly what happened to Levi when he became Matthew. And he gave up a lot of income, and he gave up a lot of Gentile friends. All right. So now the Gospel of Matthew, it's divided up into 10 sections. And each section ends with this phrase, when Jesus had ended these sayings. It says that after every section, or it says something very similar to that. In Matthew's Gospel, it's not in chronological order. It's in a topical order. And he is also the only Gospel writer that uses the word church, the called out ones, ecclesia. And when he used that word church, Matthew is anticipating that it's going to be a Jewish Gentile church, a Jewish Gentile church that's multiracial and multicultural. And so as Matthew starts his gospel, he starts by introducing his readers to the new king, because he's going to show his Jewish readers that Jesus has the legitimate legal claim to the throne of David. And anyone ever claiming to be the son of David, he had to be able to prove it. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of Bible readers who will actually skip over this whole section of all these ancient names. But these names are a very important part of the gospel record. And during Jesus' time, there would have been a lot of men that would have been able to claim their ancestry back to King David. But there wouldn't have been very many that could go back to David's throne. And that's why this pedigree is so important. And so the first thing Matthew does in his gospel is he's giving us Jesus' credentials to prove that Jesus has the proper credentials to claim the kingship, to claim the throne of David. And he does this very carefully, and he establishes Jesus' right to be the king of Israel. And the Jewish leaders, they never attacked Jesus on this claim. Jesus' heredity never came into question, and that's because they had all the records, because those records were very carefully kept, and it was very easy for them to check those records, and you know that they did, because that would have been the first thing they would have ever done to anyone who claimed to be the Messiah. And the Jews were so meticulous at keeping genealogical records and tribal genealogies. It's because they had to, because that's how you inherited property. You had to prove you had the right. You had to prove your ancestry. You had to prove your heritage. And so what we have here in Matthew is Jesus's legal lineage, because a person's legal lineage, it always went through the Father. Inheritance and tribal rights and property, they were always passed down from the father's side. It was never from the mother's. And so Matthew, he gives us Jesus' legal lineage, which came to Jesus by his adoptive father, Joseph. And so then we go through this whole list of begots. Begot, begot, begot. Abraham begot. Isaac begot. Jacob begot. And we get begot, 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 all the way down till we get to Joseph. But then when you get down to Joseph, it doesn't say that Joseph begot Jesus, because he didn't. Joseph didn't begot Jesus. What it says, and what it only says, is that Joseph is the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. And so Matthew, he makes it very clear that Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus, but he was only the husband of Mary. So this is not Jesus's biological genealogy. It's only Jesus's legal ancestry. The Gospel of Luke is what gives us Jesus's blood lineage that also goes all the way back to King David, and that's through his mother Mary. And you might say, well, why does all this matter? Well, one reason it matters is because Jesus was born of a virgin. And that's according to all the prophecies. Jesus was conceived of the Holy Spirit. Jesus was born of God. He was not born of man. Because Jesus is that seed that we've been studying all the way through Genesis. And we were following it. That was that one seed that was given to Eve. And we follow that seed as that seed was given to Abraham, and it went down to his son Isaac. And we followed that seed all the way down to Judah as we study through Genesis. And then there's those prophecies like in Isaiah 7:14 of how the virgin, of how she would conceive a son. And so Jesus, he received his legal claim to the throne through Joseph, but he's a descendant of King David through his mother Mary's bloodline. And so if we compare the genealogies that we find in Matthew and the ones that we find in Luke, they're exactly the same from Abraham all the way down to King David. But after King David, that's where they both change. Mary's not from the line of the kings. She's descended from King David's other son, which was Solomon's younger brother, Nathan. Okay, so now we have Matthew, and he's organized his genealogy of Joseph, and he does it into 3 groups of 14 generations. From Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to the Babylonian exile, 14 generations. From the Babylonian captivity to Jesus, 14 generations. But this is not a complete genealogy. Matthew has only structured it this way for the purpose of memorization. This is an abbreviated genealogy because we know, just like Matthew knew, that between Uriah and Joram, there were 3 other kings.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.